Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, the show where we dig deep into the insights of some of the leading policymakers and business people in the Middle East and indeed the world. I'm Frank Kane. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Zoom from Normandy in northern France by Nathalie Goulet. She is a member of the Senate of France and a frequent visitor to the Middle East and observer of regional affairs. Madame Goulet, welcome to Frankly Speaking.
Thank you to have me on the program.
Enchanté.
Merci.
You were recently in Saudi Arabia, Madame Goulet. Could you share some of your insights on how the trip went and how you were received in the kingdom?
Well, by the way, it was, I had a purpose, I'm currently working on financing of terrorism, more how to fight financing of terrorism. And then the embassy in Paris was kind enough to organize for me a series of meetings to follow this subject. I've been working on it for almost 5 years. So I had a lot of meetings on the subject, and I'm witnesses a lot of progress and how Saudi Arabia is matching international standard on the subject, which is not known, by the way, because we always have in Europe and especially in France a kind of bad habit to link Saudi Arabia with financing of terrorism. And then we have to break this image and this what is now purely a fake news. First of all, it's all kind of accommodation which are taking, for example, beg your pardon, we have a lot of tools, for example, Etidal, and which is very useful to track the terrorist groups. Then we have all the SAMA, the banking system, which is also working very hard to match international standard. Saudi Arabia now belongs to all international organizations working on the fighting financing of terrorism. It's not only to be on the floor and yell "no money for terror." It's not word, it's acting. And it's more important to act than to pretend. And by the way, Saudi Arabia is really acting on the subject. They also have a very strong financial intelligence service, which is very, very useful to track the money. You understand that?
Yes.
And let me give you one example. We in France, we have a lot of trouble with the way that the Muslims in France are collecting the zakat. Zakat every year for a small mosque, like 2,000 people in France, can collect more than €1 million cash. Imagine what you can do for good things, but also with bad things with €1 million cash.
I understand.
Okay, so Saudi Arabia settled a system to prevent any collect of zakat by cash. Everything is by banking transfer to a special NGO which will finance some programs. And that is very, very useful. It's very, very clever. And then in addition to all that, is very, very safe. And so, by the way, Saudi Arabia for this subject of collecting zakat can be an example for us, because we are absolutely unable to track the money. And at the same time, of course, most part of the zakat is given for good purposes, but sometimes it's not. And whatever it is, that we try to ban cash as much as possible. So we have to prevent this cash collect. And Saudi Arabia is giving us an excellent example on the subject.
So you think the techniques that have been introduced in Saudi Arabia to combat terrorism finance can be used successfully in France and in Europe and elsewhere?
Yeah, for zakat, for example, for sure. Now, regarding intelligence, financing intelligence services, I myself organized 5 or 6 years ago some meeting with the French financial intelligence services. And in fact, Saudi Arabia duplicates the French system. So it's a two-way around. I mean, it's not one way. It's two-way. Cooperation is a major point regarding financing of terrorism, because the people, they don't finance only. It's not a homemade financing. It's always cross the borders. So we have to check on the transfer. We have to check how the money is collected. We have to exchange data. And Saudi Arabia belongs to Egmont Group, which is an international group on the subject, belongs also to all kinds of international NGO on the subject. So Saudi Arabia has its own place on the subject of fighting financing of terrorism, and do it very seriously.
Okay, according to reports that I read, you also spoke about the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in the region. Now, do you think that their influence has waned recently, or are they still playing a significant role?
Oh, in Europe, they play a significant role, definitely. And we discover every day some new cases. For example, we had now a major NGO based in England, which is Islamic Relief Worldwide. And this Islamic Relief Worldwide is strongly linked with the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, collect 60 million pounds a year as a satellite all over Europe. And guess what? European Committee gave to Islamic Relief Germany more than 700,000 euro last year as subsidies. So they use what is called taqiyya. First of all, they have a lot of humanitarian action, but then they use the same money to sponsorize the terrorism all over Europe. Oh, we have to ban those people, definitely. We have to ban them.
Right. So
Austria already banned the Muslim Brotherhood from Austria. Germany is on the way. France, not yet, but I push them a lot.
But this specific organization you mentioned, Islamic Relief, what should be done about them?
Oh, first of all, we have to track the money. All the board dismissed last year because they all use a lot of anti-Semitic purpose, a lot. They had a lot of anti-Semitic tweet and attacks. So, it's like they clean themselves, they organize the taqiyya, how they have to match with European standards as long as the speeches are concerned. But underground, they are still working against European standards, and especially anti-Semitic action, speeches. And then they support Hamas. They support their leader. They are funded by some of your neighborhood countries, especially as long as Muslim Brotherhood are concerned, and Sheikh Hadawi living next door to you, to Saudi Arabia, may I say. So what we have to do is to track the money and then to dry. We have to ban any financing for those people. We have to check and have a strong investigation on how they collect money and what they are doing with this money. And we have to stop any financing. Absolutely very important to ban the financing as long as we don't clear the records.
Okay. Let me broaden this out a little bit and ask you about sentiment in France, because it seems as though anti-Arab rhetoric has been on the rise recently, maybe in relation to the run-up to the presidential election next year. An Arab News survey with YouGov on the subject of French people of Arab origin found recently that 64% felt that Arabs are negatively perceived. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's a fact, unfortunately, and it's because the major political leaders are surfing on the wave of populism, and right now it's something which will help them to collect ballots. And unfortunately, we cannot bring the people to reason on the subject. It's very, very difficult. That was the case since 9/11, and then increased after the 2015 Charlie and Bataclan and a lot of Nice attacks that we have. And it's also because of the very special systems that we have in France, which is secularism, you know. So the state, political people, I mean, politicians, parliament, and even the state cannot organize Islam because it's forbidden to interfere into religion.
But do you think there has been a real drift to the right amongst French people, or
Absolutely.
is it being used by politicians, sensationalized? Do you think there has been a real drift, towards extremism?
Yes, absolutely. And then we also have this yellow jacket and all that of street agitation, you know, and also conspirationism.
Right.
And everything is boiling in the same pan to give something very bad. I mean, smelling very, very bad. Smelling the 1929 smell. You know, something which is far from the reality. The people and a very, very important mistrust between the politician and the people. And so it's very difficult. And we saw that with COVID, you know, everything which was said about the injection and the vaccine and how you have to avoid the vaccine with a lot of crazy things and people who are fighting against this vaccination, which is a key to save us from this COVID. And all this atmosphere is very, very unpleasant and very, very scary, may I say.
Okay. One man who seems to epitomize the things that you're talking about now, racism, populism, conspiracism, is Eric Zemmour, who seems to be gaining ground, doesn't he? What do you think of his chances?
No, hopefully. No, I think these things will collapse soon. It was just like a small fire.
His campaign will collapse.
Oh, yes. That is not France. I mean, that cannot be France. I mean, this guy is a pure populist. And then he has no team. And I hope he will run out of money soon, and then will disappear in the trash because he doesn't deserve anything else than the trash.
But then does the standard just pass back to Marine Le Pen?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, because he's a new, you know, I was talking about a lack of leadership. When you have people who have been in the business for the last 30 years, like Marine Le Pen and her father, like Xavier Bertrand, like other people, that was the major added value of Macron. He was new in the business. But the other one, Valérie Pécresse, Xavier Bertrand, Michel Barnier, have been in the business for the last 30 years, all of them. So when all of a sudden somebody new appears with a lot of media coverage, so the people are attracted, especially when he's having these populist speeches, which is like saying loudly what the people are thinking in themselves. You know, it works.
Yeah.
But then the reality comes back, and the people, they don't want to be represented, hopefully, by this guy.
Madame Goulet, let me ask you about foreign relations with regard to France, because recently relations between France and Algeria have been strained, haven't they, after comments by President Macron and also a row about visas, etc. Long term, do you see this relationship improving or deteriorating?
No, I think it will improve. The link with Algeria are very strong. But, you know, it's all this part of the world that France had colonies and a long historical story that with a lot of wonders. I mean, it's difficult to solve the problem. You know, it's always very emotional.
Talking of strained foreign relationships, there has been a deepening in animosity, it seems to me, between France and Britain since Brexit. Tell me, frankly speaking, what do you think of Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his government?
You know, since Napoleon, France and Britain have some misunderstanding, let's say that. Well, but we need good relationship with Britain. You see what happened right now with the migrants, with the fishermen, with everything. I mean, we need to have a peaceful relationship with Britain, and I think these things will come back to reason soon. We cannot do otherwise.
This raises the very important issue of European migration, doesn't it? Where I know you have strong views. Tell me what you think should be done.
You know, it's a very important subject, and you know, the people who say you have to do that and you have to do that, you know, like you should do that, and then, but well, okay, do it. I think that first of all, it's difficult to understand the misery of the people and the migrants. Those people are not migrants in camps because they want to do it. It's because most part of them have been pushed, or for economic reason, or because of war and misery. And if you are looking closely to Syria and Iraq, especially Iraq, maybe some people are guilty with a bad war there and push Islamic State one of a sudden to raise is Islamic State somewhere because of a bad war, and also what happened in Libya, which a bad war, and you know, when Sarkozy wanted his own war in Libya to copy past American in Iraq, it's exactly what happened. And then you push people to migrate and to die in the middle of the sea. You know that right now Mediterranean Sea is probably the biggest cemetery in the world. More than 30,000 people die in the sea.
That's a depressing thought.
I don't see the destiny of a child of 3 or 2 or 1 to die in the middle of the street of the sea. On the street as well. So now, what should be done? It's a real agreement between the European country to save as much as possible, to save people as much as possible, but then to push the country to develop and have an economic sustainable system to keep their population where they are, which is the main issue. I mean, to migrants, they are migrating for economic reason, most part of them, okay, or political reason. So I think that development is one of the key, and then we cannot let the people die in the middle of migrant camps, like in Calais, or you know, and dying in the middle of the Channel. So I don't know what can be done, but the situation is just unbearable.
Okay.
Unbearable.
So you think the solution is to help them stay at home and give them security and economic developments at home, but if they do have to come to Europe, then we should help them.
Some of them, we cannot help all the misery of the world. And especially what happened with Britain, because Britain is giving a lot of help for migrants. It's why Britain attracts the migrants. You know, I think that Britain gave last year more than 20,000, not passport, but permit of stay in Britain.
Residence visa, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Residents things. Not, maybe not residents, but let's say, well, they allowed something like 20,000 people to stay in the country.
Oh
Okay?
yes, leave to stay. It's called leave to
Yes,
stay.
leave to
Yeah,
stay,
yeah,
yeah. More than 20,000 during the time that France maybe give 1,000. It's why Britain attract the migrant, because they know that once they reach Britain, they will be helped. And time after time, they have families, they have friends, and they try to reach Britain because they know that the British system is very open to them, which is not the case in France. It's why Britain attracts. So maybe one of the solutions would be for Britain to have more restrictive regulation for migrants, so it doesn't look so attractive. I don't know exactly the full regulation, but I know for sure that Britain attracts the migrants because it's easy for them to live and have some subsidies and help. So maybe one of the key is for Britain to be more restrictive regarding migrants, so it doesn't look so attractive. Maybe. I'm very careful. It's not an easy subject.
Yeah. One other foreign policy issue that you have been vocal about in the past has been the subject of Iran's nuclear program. Tell me, what's your latest thinking on this? Do you think that a deal can be done to reinstate the JCPOA? And if such a deal was done, would that make any difference to Tehran's aggressive stance towards its neighbors in the Middle East?
It's a very, very important subject. And what I think is that it's the mistrust between the country, the GCC and Iran is very important, and it's understandable. At the same time, we have to find a solution. So I don't think that I understand the position of the President Trump, and jeopardized completely the deal that Europeans tried to save. But right now, I was very careful, and then I understood that Her Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman tried to give a hand to Iranian regime and say that he was ready to discuss with them. So that is one way. The other way may come from Iranian people themselves. I'm not talking about the regime, I'm talking about the people, that they are now demonstrating in the street to say that Iranian money should go to Iranian hospital, to Iranian school, to Iranian people, and don't go to Hezbollah, don't go to Houthi, don't go to Hamas, don't go to the Shia minority in Bahrain, and that Iranian money has to stay in Iran, which means Iran has to stop to finance the proxies. And that could also be a solution.
Okay. Let me ask you finally, Madame Goulet, about Lebanon, which is a country and a situation where France has been involved in the past, quite prominently. Is there any hope for Lebanon? Can it be retrieved at all?
Well, talking about France, I think that we are doing, our government, normally I like to support my country, especially speaking in a foreign media. France has to speak from one voice abroad. It's understandable. But regarding Lebanon, I have to change my view, because the government for the last 15 years has always been treating Hezbollah from a very, very strange way. Like there is a political Hezbollah and a military Hezbollah. We have to ban the military Hezbollah and to discuss with the political Hezbollah. But the reality is that there is just one Hezbollah. There is one Hamas and there is one Hezbollah. There is no one military and one political. It's the same terrorist group. As long as we will have this view, it will be a misunderstanding of the situation. I think that one of the solutions will probably to bring a new political generation in Lebanon and get rid out of the religious involvement in the political system, which is making the things very, very difficult. And then probably to get rid out of the corruption. You know that most part of the political leaders were involved, one in a Pandora paper or Panama paper, and there is a lot of cases all over the world against some Lebanese leaders because of the money that has been stolen from Lebanon, and that has to be back to the country. So I don't think that Lebanese leaders have to beg any money abroad. I think that they have to bring the money back to Lebanon and rebuild the country. And all goodwill will be useful. But my guess is that new leaders must come and try to save the country instead of recycling the old one we have been knowing for ages. Which bring me to one point, maybe as a conclusion, if you don't have any other question, is the leadership. We have been talking of leadership earlier, but I think one of the, I just underline that I'm not paid by Saudi Arabia, so I can say good things because I'm thinking, frankly speaking.
Okay, okay, we hear you, yes.
Okay. That the leadership is very important. It's a key. And knowing Saudi Arabia, I've been knowing Saudi Arabia for more than 15 years. When you see the difference in the street, when you see the way that the youth is happy in the country, when you see the development, you have to think that something happened, and it's the 2030 vision of Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which brings and brought and will bring such a lot of hope in the country, and that's it. I mean, leadership is a key issue, and I think that one of the luck of Saudi Arabia is to have this kind of leadership. Everything is not perfect yet, but I think that the people have to come and visit Al-Ula and make their opinion by themselves. Instead of having prejudgment. As I said, nobody's perfect. You know, we in France, we are not perfect, and British are not perfect, German are not perfect. I mean, nobody's perfect, but the country is improving very much, and in very, very good way.
Okay, that's a great note on which to end, Madame Goulet. Thank you very much indeed for appearing on Frankly Speaking. Je vous remercie beaucoup.
Thank you.
And I hope we speak again.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on your program.